In today's programme, Julian, born to suffer haemophilia, then the health service gave him the AIDS virus. Also on World AIDS Day, pretty poster or health education, an international picture of safe sex. And how old bones are giving new clues to today's diseases.
Hello, welcome to Good Health. Now, there are 1,200 haemophiliacs in Britain who've been infected with the HIV virus, who've been given a contaminated blood transfusion. £10 million from the government 2 years ago set up the Macfarlane Trust to provide support for these people. But the payments from it are means tested and they're restricted to a maximum of £25 a week per person. Well, after intensive parliamentary lobbying for a lump sum payment, it was announced last week that each person will get £20,000. The hoped-for sum had been £80,000 each. Well, in the studio with us today is Julian Miller, who has severe haemophilia and who's infected with the HIV virus and who I know has got lots that he wants to say about that payment. We'll save those words, if we may, for part 3, because I think it would be useful, if we could, to start off with a bit of a look at haemophilia itself, what it is, what treatments there are for it, and how it affects the lives of those who suffer from it. So, welcome to Good Health, Julian.
Thank you.
And please tell me and us a bit about haemophilia.
Well, haemophilia is an inherited blood disorder. Haemophiliacs lack blood clotting factor in their blood, which means that if we cut ourselves, that we bleed more profusely and for longer because scabs don't form. Internally, when we knock ourselves, we can bleed into joints and into muscles, which is extremely painful. And the recovery period for us, unlike for a normal person, is much longer with more pain, and it can actually be life-threatening.
And is it something that you find out you have at birth? I mean, is a test done to find out if you've got it?
Well, obviously now there is, but when I was born, there were no natural tests for this, and it wasn't until I was 3 months old that I was covered in bruises. My mother was very ashamed to take me to the shops because my legs were all covered in bruises, and she thought she was going to be attacked for abusing her child. But then they took me to the doctor and I had lots of tests done, and they thought that it might be leukemia, because I believe that that is one of the signs of leukemia. But it was a complete bolt out of the blue. I mean, absolutely no history of it in my family at all. I think I'm what's called a spontaneous mutation, which sounds hideous, but it can actually occur without any history at all.
That's right. You get these sporadic cases that appear out of the blue, but as you say, on the whole, it's an inherited condition. The commonest forms are in males only. When we're talking about factor VIII deficiency, it tends to be only passed down to male offspring.
Factor VIII being the clotting
element. The clotting element. There's a chain reaction. When we are cut or traumatised in any way, a chain reaction occurs involving something like 12 or 13 different structures. And in haemophilia, usually only one of those, or a maximum of 2, are affected, but without those, the whole mechanism can't work.
Can you explain to me the difference between somebody who has the disease? Well, it's not a disease, actually, is it? It's a condition.
Yes, I mean, it's not a disease that you can catch.
No.
It is a condition, yes.
Yes. Well, can you explain to me the differences in perhaps the suffering of somebody who has it severely and somebody who has it mildly?
Yes, certainly. Mild haemophiliacs can lead a normal life, virtually, with a limited amount of treatment, and obviously being careful. They can, in certain circumstances, play sport at school, keep normal jobs, and live to a ripe old age. Severe haemophiliacs have problems with bleeding into the joints, particularly. Of course, external cuts are damaging, but often half of the clotting of an external cut is done by the air, and unless a cut is very deep, it normally will form a scab after a few hours, probably a few hours more than a normal person would. But where the danger is the joints into the ankles, the knees, the elbows, fingers, I mean all your joints. When I was a child, the smallest trauma bleed meant that I used to have to go into hospital and have whole blood plasma from a drip, which used to take a week. Then at the end of the 1960s, the beginning of the early 1970s, this amazing drug, which was highly concentrated clotting factor, Factor 8 in my case, came from America, and it turned that week in a hospital bed with a drip up, totally immobile, into a quarter of an hour injection that you could do yourself at home. Now it was a very expensive drug, and so early on we were only treated as and when we had a bleeding episode. But the doctors soon came to realize the value of preventive treatment, so that, for example, if you can treat a bleeding episode before it happens, there are two things. Firstly, you require less Factor 8 to treat it, and secondly, you're stopping the damage that would ensue from the bleed, and hopefully then decreasing the danger of damage to joints, deformity, and therefore increasing people's quality of life.
Can I just ask one very, I mean, it's probably staring me in the face, the answer, but how do you know when you're having a bleed inside?
It becomes intuitive. When you're a child, you don't. And because you're a child, you don't always do the things necessary to prevent yourself having a bleed. So you bleed, of course, a lot more when you're a child. You also bleed a lot more when you're an adolescent, because when you're going through puberty and you're growing very quickly at the end of your bones, all your joints are much more volatile. When I get a bleed, first of all, you have a tingling sensation in the affected area. It swiftly becomes, if it's a joint particularly, becomes stiff and hot, and then it swells. And then normally, after a period of time, if it's not treated, it will then stiffen, locked.
When you're given Factor 8, how long does the beneficial effect last?
Well, I treat myself at home with Factor 8. It depends, of course, on the quantity you give yourself. We could give ourselves enough Factor 8 to make us near normal, but it is so expensive that we can't. We just simply couldn't. It would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds for each of us every year to do that. I normally give myself 1 or 2 injections a week, and the beneficial qualities of that last up to from 24 hours to 48 hours, but then there is always a residual leftover until the next injection.
Well, we must leave it there for the moment. It's, of course, the Factor 8, is it not, that has caused all the problems,
yes,
which have hit the news recently as far as the HIV virus is concerned. We'll be talking about that in part 3, so do join us again then. But coming up after the break right now, part 2 and good health news.
Good Health News with Debbie Middleton and David Lawrence. Hello, today is World AIDS Day. It's being marked by dozens of events worldwide aimed at raising public awareness about the disease. Here in Britain, the Health Education Authority has sponsored full-page advertisements in the national press. They warn that thousands of Britons don't know they're infected with the AIDS virus. The adverts say people can carry the virus for years without symptoms. There are over 11,000 known cases, but experts suggest as many as 50,000 people could be carrying the disease.
The Princess of Wales is at a major London hospital today to open a new ward for AIDS sufferers. The new ward's been set up at St Mary's Hospital to give specialised help to people with HIV and AIDS. And Health Minister Virginia Bottomley is visiting the London Lighthouse, a support centre for HIV sufferers. Among the things she'll see there is an exhibition of AIDS education posters Taken from countries around the world, they show how each has tackled the AIDS issue. The exhibition's organiser is critical of this morning's campaign in British newspapers.
How can the spread of AIDS be stopped? It's a problem which governments, health agencies and community groups the world over have struggled with in the last few years. Today their efforts are on display in an exhibition called Visual AIDS. It's being held at the London Lighthouse, a care and advice centre for people infected with the AIDS virus. The exhibition organiser says some posters are successful, while others fail miserably. Why do you think this Swiss poster is so effective?
I think because of its simplicity, bold graphics, an easily read message, a visual pun. This is in fact first a stoplight. You stop the behavior that may lead to AIDS, but it's also a go-ahead message, have sex with a condom. When the same message is superimposed upon an image of a prostitute's legs, I think it fails utterly because it focuses attention upon a supposedly high-risk group, prostitutes, rather than upon risky behaviors.
This is a good poster. It's got a very strong visual message.
I agree with you. The message is strong, but I think it's totally counterproductive because it gives no positive instructions to drug users and equates AIDS with death, thereby turning people with AIDS into malevolent zombies.
It's clear from looking around the exhibition that it's the posters which give simple, practical advice on how to avoid infection which are the most useful. Those which frighten the viewer or suggest that patriotism should stop people putting themselves at risk of infection are wasted. And what's his reaction to today's newspaper ads, placed by the Health Education Authority, which point out that you can't tell who has the AIDS virus?
I'm outraged by it, frankly, because it suggests that people with HIV are hidden terrorists who are in the general population and who are going to bring down society, and we must separate ourselves, the healthy majority, from this group of secret, marauding individuals who are going to destroy the fabric of society. It's as if the government believes it's easier to stamp out the sex drive in the human race than it is to combat the virus in practical terms at a community level.
Messages don't have to be serious to work.
Well, this Australian poster uses humor very effectively to get its safer sex message across. These are silly people because they put condoms on their heads. It makes us, the viewer, feel very smart because we know the proper place where condoms belong.
Old bones could lead to new discoveries about our ancestors and help doctors understand more about genetic diseases like haemophilia. In research carried out at Oxford's John Radcliffe Hospital, scientists have, for the first time, managed to recover genetic material from human bones over 5,500 years old. The research published in this week's issue of the science journal Nature will help doctors to understand how hereditary diseases like haemophilia and sickle cell anemia first evolved.
And finally, parents with noisy babies desperate for a quiet night's sleep are sometimes tempted to lace baby's milk with cereal, hoping that early introduction of solids will help baby to sleep. But that's all bunkum, an old wives' tale, according to doctors who've tested adding cereal on over 100 babies. They say that baby learns to sleep through the night regardless of when solids are added to meals.
Stay with us after the break for more on the rough deal that's been given to Britain's haemophiliacs.
Hello, welcome back to part 3 and to our guest Julian Miller. Now then, we've got to the point really, which brought us right up to what's happened in recent history.
Well, in about 1979, the wonder drug Factor VIII, which revolutionised our lives, and in fact had given us a life expectancy only 18 months below the national average, it began to be fairly plain that there might be a problem with AIDS infection of American blood products.
Was this because we were still buying in the Factor VIII from America?
Yes, I mean in 1975, Dr. David Owen was health minister. He pledged that it was the British government's aim to make us self-sufficient in Factor VIII. There had been some problems in the early 70s, not problems, but there had been an inkling that it might be difficult. There might be difficulties because of the way the Americans pool and collect their blood. I mean, they used to pay people, so they used to get people with drug addicts and alcoholics and down and outs who had bombarded their bloodstreams with extraordinary quantities of foreign bodies, and it got to the point where we were beginning to get an inkling of what was going on. And I read the papers, so I decided to find out a bit about AIDS. So in about 1980 or 81, I went to a VD clinic, St Mary's in Paddington. It's the only place in those days where you could find out any information about these things. And I went to see a VD consultant, and I sat in the corridor with all the other people who were waiting to see them for a different reason. And he told me in a very grave, very serious way about AIDS. I mean, I was saying, you know, what is this? And he told me all about it, and, you know, I left rather shocked, because it's quite a frightening thing. And, but I went to my doctors and I said, look, what is this? Is there any danger?
I mean, presumably you must have been aware of the implications.
Oh, yes. And, of course, it was predominantly manifesting itself in the early 80s amongst the homosexual community in this country. And then all the tabloid press, The Sun, etc., were calling it a gay plague. And so there was great stigma attached to it. But my doctor said, no, carry on taking your factor VIII. You're in more danger of a life-threatening bleeding episode than you are from getting AIDS. So I carried on. And in October 1984, having been tested, they told me that I was HIV positive.
Now, how big a problem is that? How many haemophiliacs out of the total are affected with the virus? And of those, have any had any very serious repercussions already?
Well, there are roughly 5,500 to 6,000 people with haemophilia in this country. Of those 5,500, 1,200 are infected with the HIV virus. Of those 1,200, 108 have died, and another 200 have full-blown AIDS. So there are about 600 or 700 who are perfectly all right.
Can I ask you, as somebody in this situation, what it's like? Can you give us an idea of what it's like to be in that position where you've got the virus, and the future really, to a certain extent, is rather unknown?
Being HIV, I have not yet exhibited any of the signs of the full-blown AIDS syndrome, any of the opportunistic infections associated with it. Being HIV positive is extraordinary, because ostensibly I'm perfectly healthy. Where it hits you, of course, is psychologically. And when I first found out, because you don't immediately develop cancer or meningitis or one of the diseases that can be caused by this, you have this slightly unreal feeling of, well, you know, there's nothing wrong with me. And the way people cope with haemophilia in their lives traditionally has been to say, well, you know, I'm not going to let this beat me. But AIDS is such a massive onslaught on your system that, you know, you have this, it's like a vulture sitting on your shoulder. You're always looking over your shoulder to see when it'll pounce. And every time you have a night sweat, or you have a cold, or chapped lips, or whatever, you feel, my God, could this be it? So it didn't really affect me to start with. It's been much longer term. It affected my family and my loved ones, and really I got my reaction from their reaction, which was one of horror, of course. I always think it's more difficult for people who are actually caring for people who are suffering than in many ways for the sufferer, because the sufferer is the one that's going through it, but the carer wants to be going through it with them and gets very frustrated. What really affected me was the actual physical manifestations of being HIV positive. Like, for example, it would be irresponsible of me to have a long-term relationship, get married. I would not really want to have children and put my wife and their children at risk. Psychologically, I now have a feeling whereby I don't want to compromise on my life. I mean, I want the best for me. and consequently, therefore, I've resigned my job because I couldn't be bothered. You know, it's all part of trying to have a positive look on life, trying to keep well.
Talk about your jacket, please.
Oh, well, it's all part of the same thing. I mean, it gives me, for some reason, it gives me an inordinate amount of pleasure to go into a shop and buy a loud jacket like this. And it is part of the same thing. I had a friend who became very ill with AIDS, a person with haemophilia, who came out of hospital having been given the last rites and recovered. And he looked at his shoes and said, "My goodness, I need a new pair of shoes." And then he said, "No, I won't bother, I'll be dead in 3 months." But then he realised, he said, "No, damn it, I'm going to buy a very nice pair of shoes." And it's all part of the attitude of keeping fit, staying well, healthy diet, keeping warm.
And he didn't die within 3
No,
months, did he?
he's still alive.
That's marvellous. It's certainly a defiant jacket. Now,
Thank you.
The question I really want to put to you now is the nitty-gritty of the whole news at the moment about what's the word? Compensation for haemophilia sufferers who have been infected with the AIDS virus. How do you feel about the offer that's been made?
It's not compensation,
No.
is it? Because the government are not
They are not
accepting liability.
accepting liability. It is a very complicated thing. In 1987, we went to the government and said, "Please, look, this is a dreadful situation. It is being called the worst tragedy to hit the NHS since it was started in 1945. People are dying, people are being made destitute, there were children being removed from school because they were getting discrimination. There was dog mess being put through people's letter boxes. I mean, it was a dreadful situation. There was real poverty, real need, and we went to the government. And in 2 weeks, in 1987, they came up with a sum of £10 million as what they call an ex gratia payment, basically a gift that was put into a trust to relieve real need. So, for example, it was buying people washing machines who didn't have washing machines, because when you have AIDS, you can become doubly incontinent, and therefore the washing bill goes up. You're meant to keep warm, you're meant to eat a very high-protein diet.
So it was to assist generally?
It was, yes.
But this latest payment?
This latest payment, I mean, it became patently clear that the £10 million was not enough, even for the real need cases. It is very, very rare in this country or any other country for people to go to the National Health Service in good faith and receive treatment for one life-threatening disease and then be given another on top. So, you know, you go to help one and you come out with another. What we wanted the government to do is to recognise its moral responsibility to this group, this particular small group of very badly disadvantaged human beings. So we thought, maybe naively, that the government would accept this, as other governments have around the world. And they didn't. And they said, no, if you think we've been negligent, so it's always putting the, you know, the onus back on us to prove it. They said, prove it. Prove we're negligent. So 600 of us, those that can afford it, those that can get legal aid, those that actually are prepared to go through the struggle, the trauma, the nightmare, the heartbreak of going through the courts, are suing the government.
And you've...
Well, the
that
government
has nothing to do with this payment that you've got now.
Last week, the government said that they were going to give us £20,000, topping up what they'd done for the McFarlane Trust 2 years ago. And we had a huge groundswell of support. MPs, the press, all the media. And I believe that it was really, the £20,000 is a way of keeping the press quiet, and it's a way of buying off the backbench Tory MPs. They are still saying that we should go through the courts. But that, by the earliest estimate, it'll be 1991 before any trial comes to court. And the government have made it perfectly clear that if we win, they will appeal it all the way to the House of Lords. So, I mean, you could be 5, 10 years, by which time many of us will be dead. Most of us will be dead. So what's the point? We can't afford emotionally, financially, physically to go through the courts. Negligence is one of the most difficult things to prove. I'd like the government to say, or I'd like the government to say, no, okay, it doesn't matter who's negligent. We are morally responsible to help these people. I mean, the money gives you the choice at the end of the day to die with dignity. It gives you the choice to choose the way, not the way you die, but how you die, in what circumstances you die, rather than being pushed around corridors in underfunded health service.
Right. Well, perhaps if you watch this space, we'll be able to get a government reply to that. Thank you very much in the meantime, Julian, for coming in and saying those words and telling us about haemophilia in general. If you'd like to get in touch with Julian or get in touch with the Haemophilia Society, of which he is a part, the address is 123 Westminster Bridge Road, London, SE1 7HR. Julian, thank you very much indeed for coming on to Good Health. That's all from Good Health for today. Do join us again if you can. Until then, from all of us here, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.